Hey, happy Friday, everyone. It is Friday, January 8th, and we continue with our prayer calendar. Scriptures every day. We're encouraged to study them, pray them, and write them. Thereby, hopefully, they lend themselves to sinking in a little bit deeper into our lives. If you're in need of a calendar, we release it, the day's readings every morning on Facebook, on our church Facebook page. You can get it in the printed January pathway. You can get it online, fumccv.org, and search the Pathway Archives, and you can find it there in the January pathway. So all kinds of ways to get it. Also, we have some in our, for those of you who are local, have some in our church office lobby. The book today that we are in, the scripture we're in, is in the book of Hebrews. It is chapter 10, verse 23. So Hebrews chapter 10, verse 23. Hebrews is a book way towards the back of the New Testament. There's just a few books after Hebrews, just a few pages before we get to the end. And so maybe you're like 20 pages from the end of the Bible itself. So Hebrews chapter 10. Let me say something about the book of Hebrews. There's lots of debate about who wrote it. Was it Paul? Was it a follower of Paul? Was it someone sort of writing in Paul's name? It's very interesting if you study literature of the time. You know, Homer wrote the Greek epics, Odyssey and Iliad, and there were hundreds of books that were attributed to Homer, even though he didn't write them. It was very common in those days to attribute what you're writing to someone else who was more famous. We don't do that anymore. That's not what we ought to do, but it is a way that you get people to buy your books or to read your books. They did that a lot in the ancient Near East. And so there is some debate about who exactly wrote it. Was it Paul, or was it penned by sort of one of Paul's helpers in his evangelism ministry? There's not a lot of doubt about who it was written to, though. We believe who the book of Hebrews, right? There's not a village called Hebrews. So the other letters that Paul wrote were, many of the other letters. So the Philippians is written to the people in Philippi. Ephesians was written to the people in Ephesus. And so they're to particular towns. But this is written to the Hebrews. And so okay, we're talking about the Jewish people. If we're talking about Hebrews, we're writing it to Jewish people. But it's clearly written in Greek, is the original language. So if that probably means Jewish people who don't live in Jerusalem. Then you look at what's talked about in the book and the different events going on, and it seems to be there's some great persecution that the people are undergoing. And so you put all of these pieces together and all the history and all the study, and what we believe is this book is written to Jewish Christians who are in Rome. So there's a group of Christians living in Rome. Some of them are Gentiles, some of them are Jew. These are the Jewish Christians that are living in and around Rome. And let's hear the passage, and we'll talk more about what the message to these people is. So Hebrews chapter 10, verse 25. Oh, I'm sorry, verse 23. Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. And let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching. Now, I've said this many times. When you read Paul, we essentially are listening to one side of a phone conversation. Now, if you can't hear the person on the other side, you only hear one voice, and you have to make up what the other person is asking. So the person I can hear answered this. The person on the other line must have asked a question about this, right? And that's what we have to do with the book of Paul, with the letters that Paul wrote. So he says, let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. Now, who do you say something like that to? Will you say, let us hold fast without wavering, to people who you have heard or you fear are wavering? So these are Jewish Christians living in Rome who are wavering in their faith. to go on. And let us consider how to provoke one another to love and good deeds. So let us consider how to provoke one another to that kind of behavior as opposed to some other kind of behavior. I mean, if they were behaving with love and good deeds all the time, then you don't tell them, let us consider provoking those things. So they're wavering in their faith. They're not responding. They're not behaving with love and good deeds. Verse 25, not neglecting to meet together. Apparently, I mean, again, if people are meeting together all the time, then you don't tell them you need to meet together all the time. The people who you say you need to meet together all the time are the ones who are neglecting to do that. And then at the end, all the more as you see the day approaching. What does that? Something is coming. Now, let me tell you what's going on in these people's lives. There is terrible, terrible persecution that is happening to Christians in and around Rome. And some Christians, they're being killed daily, drug out of their homes, tortured, public humiliation and torture just for being Christian. So some of them undergo that torture. We call those martyrs, right? Some of them give up their faith. Some of the Gentile Christians just begin living according to Gentile ways. What is happening here is that these Jewish Christians are considering to just go back and live the old Jewish law. So we've lived this Jewish law. We became Christians. We continued living this Jewish law with this added sort of piece of our faith, Christianity, this belief in Jesus as a Messiah, but we don't give up the old ways. Some of them are considering, they're wavering, let's just give up Christ and we'll go back to the old law. And if you read the whole book of Hebrews, it talks about that there is a new covenant. There's a new law. That it's not that old stuff is bad, but there's this new thing that Christ has superseded all of that. And so Paul's encouraging them, you can't give it up. You can't give up Christ and just go back to the old ways. So don't waver. Provoke love and good deeds. Continue to act the ways of Christ. Don't neglect meeting together. Encourage one another until you see the day approaching. And the day approaching is the day in which they were the ones to get drug out of their homes and tortured or humiliated or killed. So the day approaching is the day of persecution. The day that the persecution is finalized. So it's really, it's talking about a kind of spirituality that most of us in the world are never going to know. A spirituality that says, I'm holding on to this faith, even if it means I lose my physical life. Very, very few of us in the world today are persecuted to death because of our Christian faith. There are some places still, but very few know the wages of that kind of faith. We're not going to know that today, obviously, in the ways in which we live. But it might be good for us as we begin this new year thinking about our faith and what it means to us to consider that there have been thousands, hundreds of thousands of Christians through the years who believed in Jesus so fervently that they even gave their life for that belief. It wasn't something that, their faith was not, it was life or death. It wasn't something that brought comfort to them. They weren't Christians because it brought joy. It wasn't something that, was a sort of social thing. It wasn't something that they were born into. They were Christians as a matter of life and death. And if we had just a bit of that kind of passion, imagine the ways in which we could change the world. So we give that to you to begin this year to think about your faith in those regards. I hope this is helpful to you. God bless. Have a great day.